Okay, hello and welcome to the 10th episode of Experts on Air. Woohoo! This is a bit of a special one, especially for me. It's a topic that I've been dreaming of for a long time. So just a reminder of what this show is. It's a bunch of Google developer experts from around Africa where we get together and talk about a specific topic every month. Last month it was something about the cloud. Next month it's something about the web. But this month it is Android and in-app payments. All right, so if you're on the live chat on the YouTube link, you can add your questions there if anything comes up during the episode, and we'll be sure to answer those towards the end. The video and slides will be made available shortly after the episode this evening. And if you would like to join in on social media, the hashtag Google Africa Devs is the one you want to be using. Okay, so on to this month, Android in-app payments in Africa specifically, how to monetize your Android apps. We'll cover what you need to get started, as well as an example of actually implementing it in a real app and what you need to watch out for. And then we'll also chat a bit about best strategies for monetizing your app. Okay, so this month on the call, we have myself, Alex, Android GDE from Cape Town. And we also have Dario, Android GDE from Mozambique. I believe he's somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment though. And we have Rebecca, GDE from Johannesburg. And we also have Dale, Web Cloud, GDE from Cape Town. And we have Vivian from Google, our Developer Community Manager from Nairobi, Kenya. This month, we've brought back our special guest, Nick Rout. He's also from Cape Town, a GDG organizer. He's joining us this week because he gave a talk earlier this month about subscription purchases within Android. So he'll be giving us some extra information on subscriptions. All right, on to the main topic. So before we dive into the details of it, why is this an important topic to me? Why is it such a big deal? Well, I ran a poll last night on Twitter asking of the 54 African countries, how many of them have the ability for developers to create merchant accounts and sell their apps. The responses were interesting. Many people thought it must be reasonable that there are 20, 30 countries, right? The majority did get it right with less than 10. The actual number, in fact, you may be surprised to know that it's recently doubled to 4. Yes, 4 countries in Africa have the ability for developers to create merchant accounts and generate revenue through their apps. So, Dario, please help me out here. What's the one question we tend to always get across all the different countries where we give talks about Android in Africa?
That's a tough one. I'm joking. So every time we travel across Africa through the different talks that we've given, developers always ask us the question of how they can monetize and sell goods through their apps. And it was a very sad moment to answer that they can't, and without knowing the reasons. But now, as you mentioned, Alex, we have 4 countries, and hopefully that number grows from there. I'm really interested to hear from you. What's in the box for tonight?
Absolutely, fantastic stuff. And I'm sure that you've given that feedback onto Google. I've definitely passed on my feedback. Rebecca, I think I've heard that you may have also passed on this feedback before to Google.
Yes, countless times. So we've had a lot of meetings, a lot of like whenever anyone asks for feedback from the African community, what is the number one thing that you want? Or what is the number one thing that developers are asking for? And it was always, we need merchant account support. So I'm very excited that this has now happened. And hopefully I can start making money from my apps that I put on the store now.
That's the dream. Excellent. So I think we need to give a big thank you to Google actually for taking this feedback and putting in the work to actually add more African countries to this group. So just to cover which countries that is, it's Egypt and Nigeria have had the option for quite a while for merchant accounts, a good few years, but recently in November last year, South Africa was added to that group. And earlier this year, Tanzania was also added. So this is an exceptionally good sign for the rest of Africa that countries are being added, and Google is starting to give some love and attention to some African countries in that regard. So thanks a lot for that, Google. And an important note is that the developers in these countries in Africa now have an important thing to do. We need to go out and actually build apps, use these in-app purchases, and show Google that it's benefiting our developers. But we'll touch more on that later. Okay, so diving into it, getting started. If you want to add in-app purchases to your app, it's fairly straightforward to get started. First of all, you need to register for a merchant account through the Play console, and that's very straightforward. I think someone measured it as exactly 7 simple steps. You basically fill in some information, enable it, and you're good to go immediately. Beyond that, you need an app that people actually want to use. And then on top of that, you need a product that people want to buy from that app. So it's not a particularly simple thing to just go out and build something that everyone's going to pay for. So the focus there is on quality. We need to build good apps and products that people want to use. The final thing you need is a willingness to share. So yes, a portion of the revenue does go to Google. It's about 30%. It is exactly 30%, in fact. But I think that is actually quite well worth it when you consider the billion+ people that you can reach through this platform. I said it's about 30% because I know that's what it is for in-app payments, but Nick, as the subscription expert here, can you tell us if that's the same for subscriptions?
Yeah, so I can comment on that. For subscriptions, the same fee applies for the first year that a user is subscribed to your content and pays for your content. After that, 15% of the revenue goes to Google. So I suppose they're incentivizing you to provide meaningful, long-lasting content to keep your customers around for a while.
Excellent. That makes sense. Fair enough. All right, let's dive into a couple slides while we run through exactly how we go about adding in-app purchases to our app. All right, yes, so Google came to our rescue there. We've run through what you need to do, setting up your merchant account, building an app people want, and sharing your revenue. So what can you sell? So there are different ways that you can generate revenue through the Play Store on Android, and one is with paid apps, and that's basically charging a once-off fee for letting people download and install your app. We then have managed products, and this is basically what we refer to as in-app purchases. And they're once-off purchases that can be consumed, and we'll touch on what it means to consume a purchase later. And then we have subscriptions, which, well, they recur monthly or annually. Nick, I'm not sure if you want to add anything onto subscriptions and how they're different from managed products.
At this stage, I would say there's a few other things that you could perhaps set up on the Play console for subscriptions that don't really make sense for managed products. So things like grace periods, free trials, and as you say, recurrence periods. Those are sort of quite subscription specific, but otherwise they're very close to managed products in that they have a price and sort of an identification, an ID.
All right, great. So just because you can sell something in your app, it doesn't mean you should. The world is your oyster, so to speak, but we should be somewhat responsible in what we sell. If you try to push off something that has no real value, you'll get some pretty upset customers and they will demand their refunds. So keep in mind that what we do sell through our apps is very important. All right, so let's walk through adding in-app billing to an app. You start off by configuring your products within the Play console. So in the navigation on the side under Store Presence, you'll find in-app products. And from there, it's very straightforward. You can manage your products, managed ones and subscriptions by creating new ones. And the important fields to be aware of is the price, of course, but you get a title and a description. You can then, once you've added your products, set them to active or deactivated. So what is that product ID I'm talking about? That's also known as an SKU. It's basically an identifier that uniquely identifies a particular product. So you set the price, and the good thing there is that Google goes ahead and localizes that price into many different currencies around the world. So you don't have to calculate that and figure it out, but your users get a nice localized experience. Okay, so time to get developing. Not quite, we read the documentation first. So reading about, we see there's in-app billing API. That sounds good. Also the Play Billing library. Okay, I know how to use an API and also know how to use a library, but which one should I use? So let's dive a little deeper into the documentation. The in-app billing API is listed as making it easier for you to integrate the in-app billing into your apps. Easy is good. Then we look at the Play Billing library, which is billed as being straightforward and simple. Okay, cool. Let's go and look at their example application. That's usually a good way to figure out the best way of doing things. So we scroll up to the top of the page and we see that that example uses the billing API. So after a few frustrating hours of fiddling with the billing API, I thought it's best to try the other way. And it turns out that I took the difficult path so you won't have to. If you are coming to this choice, the easy one is the billing library. And it turns out the billing API is the older way of doing things. And in about September last year, the Play Billing library was released. I don't think the documentation has been updated perfectly to explain that story. But if you don't hate yourself, the Play Billing library is the one you should go for there. Nick, I know you had some comments about this when I gave a talk on it. Is there anything you want to add to this point?
Yeah, so I agree with you entirely there, and that's the in-app billing API is the old way to do things. It seemed to be fairly complicated. You mentioned going through these many loopholes, but the Play Billing library was added quite recently as a wrapper around this in-app billing API to make it easier to deal with. Interestingly, I work at a company now where they previously had an Android app, which also had subscriptions back in the day. It's not around anymore, but according to the other devs who were there before, sample code pulled from the in-app billing API was quite a big cause of crashes in the old app. I'm hopeful that the sample code provided for the Play Billing library, I think it's called Trivial Drive v2, will be a lot better, and also as a result lead to less crashes.
Excellent, thank you for that. Yeah, so the takeaway from the first problem I ran into was to select the Play Billing library. And now it's time to actually get started writing some code. I won't dive into the details too much here because there is a good sample project, as Nick mentioned, and the documentation is decent once you know which choice to make. So as usual, you start off by adding some Gradle stuff. You also add a new permission for billing, which is important. Then there are a couple of example classes that you can copy from the documentation, particularly the billing manager and security classes. So the billing manager is basically just a convenience class that wraps up the Play Billing library. It can act as a sort of single point of entry within your app into billing. The security class comes with some methods used for verifying and validating the purchases, which we'll touch on later. Then you simply grab your app's public key from the Play console, embed that in your code, and then you query the available products and present them to your users and profit. So hang on, query the items available for purchase. That seems quite straightforward, right? You say, I've set up these products within the Play console, so now show them to me, except that's not the case. According to the sample code and documentation, you need to maintain a list of your product IDs or SKUs separately within your app so that you can ask the Play Billing library for the details of that list of products. So obviously no one wants to be keeping a hard-coded list of products in their app. You will want to be able to disable certain products and add products at your will. So there are many different solutions to this problem, but let's check that sample code first. This is basically straight from the documentation. As you can see, create a list of your SKU or product IDs, and then you ask the billing client for the details of that list of SKUs and products. So the challenge here is how to have that list without embedding it in your app. I was working on an app that doesn't have a backend, no API, so I did not want to embed it in the app. Instead, I looked at Firebase Remote Config. Don't worry, I won't be deviating into a whole talk about Firebase and all the goodness there, but a quick diversion into Firebase Remote Config. It's basically a key value pair that you can manage remotely. So in the Firebase console, you can set up any number of keys with a value, and they can be booleans or strings. So what I've done is I've set up a key for whether billing is enabled or not, so I can easily turn it off or on, as well as a list of enabled products. So I can easily remove something from that list. So setting up is really simple. Using it is almost as simple. So we start off by adding stuff to Gradle, of course, but then we move on to actually configuring it. And an optional step is to set defaults that ship with your app so that if someone installs and opens your app while they're offline, you can still have defaults set for all of your values. So we get an instance of our Firebase Remote Config, and we call fetch. So that will go ahead and fetch the latest values from the Firebase server. You don't have to worry about retrying or caching or any of that. Firebase handles all of that for you, which is fantastic. The default caching, I believe, is 12 hours. So then once you have your values, you can go ahead and simply use them. So you get the instance and get Boolean or get string. So you can see how you can use those as flags effectively that are remotely configured. Rebecca, I remember you giving a talk on Firebase recently, a while ago now. I think it was on Remote Config. Have I used it correctly?
Yes, that's how simple it is. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Like you can also enable A/B testing with it. So if you wanted to only enable billing for certain sets of users, like 50% of your users, you can do that as well with the Firebase Remote Config. It's really, really powerful.
Excellent. I can agree with that. I thought this was going to be something that put me off billing for a while, but I got this all set up and sorted and working in production within 20 minutes. So it's really simple. Okay, so everything's working. Fantastic. But when we look at validating purchases, the documentation says that, hey, that code that we showed you, the demo app, it's actually not so secure. So what's happening here is when a purchase completes, you get a token for that purchase, and then you're expected to validate that purchase, that it came from your app. So Google does provide example code of how to do this on the device, but they do suggest that purchases should be validated off device. So the vulnerability here is that someone takes your APK, decompiles it, puts their public key in there instead, and then recompiles it. That way, the purchases people would be doing in your app would actually end up going to this shady person. So to be entirely secure and safe, you should be validating your purchases off device. So that would mean sending that purchase token to your API or some backend server and validating it with the code that Google provides, making sure it came from your certificate, your app. I did start looking at Firebase again for this. Could I use Cloud Functions for it? Rebecca, I'm not sure if you've used Cloud Functions at all.
Yes, I have used Cloud Functions. You could probably set this up, but you would probably also want to make use of something like the Cloud Firestore or something like that, just to store that a certain user has purchased something. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really done it, but I would assume you can do it with Firebase.
Excellent. Yes, I'm sure you could as well. I had a quick look, and it does look like validating the purchase would not be a problem at all. But as you say, once you get into the realm of actually generating content or providing content to users, you want to be tracking that in some back end of your own, whether that's Firebase or some other solution. While we're on security, a couple other things to note. The content that you do provide to customers, you want to make sure it's protected. So that might mean encrypting it. Let's say you provide an image, something truly beautiful. You will want to encrypt that before letting them save it to the SD card. Otherwise, they can simply forward that content onto someone else. So any content that you do provide, you'll want to make sure that it is encrypted and they can only access it when you verify and validate that they have purchased it. One last note on security is the public key that you embed in your code should be obfuscated. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that if that reverse engineer shady character comes along and they decompile your APK, it's not immediately obvious how to just replace your key with their key. So they do suggest potentially breaking it up into multiple parts, potentially doing an XOR operation on them. And of course, ProGuard helps to obfuscate your code in general. But identifying a public key would be quite straightforward if it is embedded directly as one string. So that's it on security. I know that some of these terms are a bit new to some people. So Dario, just a quick check-in. Did that actually make sense?
Yes, yes, Alex, totally. So like the thing of sending the list of SKUs to a remote server is totally a good idea because you don't want to be recompiling your app every time. And also the part of validating payments, I guess like that was a really good piece of information that even if we don't start looking at it now for the sample of, for the purpose of learning, it's an important concept to definitely make it stronger because it's going to be a big deal as Google start activating more countries in Africa. So you got to make sure that as developers, we are prepared and try to learn about these topics.
Excellent, thanks, Dario. Good point. Yeah, we need to make sure that we do this right, basically. When dealing with other people's money, it's very important, and hopefully money that becomes ours. Right, so testing is always an important thing to building things. Luckily, it's very straightforward with in-app billing through Google Play. Within the Play console, you can simply add a number of email addresses that are associated with Google Gmail accounts. And then if you're testing with that account, you get access to two different payment methods, one being a card that always succeeds and one being a card that always fails. So you can easily test those different flows. You also have the option of changing how the license test responds. And I think, Nick, you brought up some interesting things about that license test response and about how subscriptions work a bit differently, for testing at least.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so with subscription testing, as with regular in-app purchases, you do also get these sort of success or failure responses. So things that will always fail, so you can test that flow, and things that will pass and indicate like a successful payment as well. So that's helpful. We also do get test purchases, so you can set up actual items that you can, almost like fake products that you can use to test maybe a different list of products, how they would look, how they would work. For subscriptions specifically, because they're periodic recurring billing, there'll be times when you want to test how if it works when that subscription actually renews. So in the real world, I mean, if you have, let's say, a monthly subscription payment period, you don't want to be waiting that long. So just to see if that works. So in a test environment, those periods are substantially shorter. For example, if you chose to do a 1 week billing period in a test environment, that would be 5 minutes. There are a bunch of, there's basically a mapping between the various subscription period options that you get and what they would be in the test environment, which is available in the documentation.
Okay, cool. I'm not quite sure which represents the lazy developer better. Developer waiting 30 days to test something, or developers changing how time works. Either way, good testing is always important. And what's even more important than good testing, or even building a good thing, is making sure that you measure that it's working and successful. So there's no point in selling stuff and just hoping it works. You actually want to make sure that you are generating revenue, which customers you're generating it from, which products are selling. So with that regard, there's some basic reporting within the Play console, but Firebase Analytics gives a much better view out of the box. So without any effort at all, if you add Firebase Analytics, you'll get some decent analytics on exactly how it's being used. But if you're serious about this, you'll be digging way deeper into this kind of information, tracking a lot more data of your own, seeing where customers fall off in the flows and that sort of thing. All right, okay, so that's how you actually get it all set up, the theory at least. Let's have a quick look at an example of an app where I added in-app billing. So the first thing you'll notice is in the Play Store, there's a little point there saying there are in-app purchases inside of this app. That's a good indicator that you know a game is free to play, but it'll take a long time to grind through it unless you pay some money. I did mention that there's a permission you must add, so it's worth noting that for customers on old devices, or if you haven't updated beyond API 22, customers will be required to go to the Play Store, update, and agree to the new permission. So of course, I'm sure you're keeping up to date with those things, so not a problem. So in this app, it's an app that I've always wanted to be entirely free and ad-free. So I didn't want to add sort of special content or features that were locked behind an in-app purchase. Instead, I opted for the option of letting customers who get value through this app tipping the developers to support them a little bit. So once you tap that support us button, you can see a list of the different products that are available. So you can sponsor a coffee or a beer or lunch, or even an app update if you're that generous. So this is me fetching those different products from the Play console, getting the details of each one, such as the price, name, and description, and then presenting that to the user. Once they tap on one of those items, it takes them into a familiar UI controlled by the Play services. So this is not my app, not my UI, but rather what users are familiar with. So at this point, they're shown the price again, the app that is trying to take their money, as well as the payment method that they'll be using. So once they go ahead and confirm that purchase with their fingerprint or password, they'll get a message from Google Play saying if it was successful or not. And then at that point, we can validate the purchase ourselves, and we can provide a little thank you message or something more substantial, depending on what the product is that you're selling in your app. So let's have a quick look, unless there are any questions from the panel on how that flow works. Nick, I don't know if you have any input there.
Not too many at the moment, not too much at the moment. All looks quite good to me.
Great. I saw you were relaxing a bit there, so I had to put you on the spot. So that's a basic demo of how you can implement a payment flow with a variety of products within an app. How's that actually done with code? Let's dive into that. So I've been using the Billing Manager class that is part of the documentation for in-app billing and the Play library. They simply create a new instance of that, and then I've used Firebase Remote Config to get the list of enabled SKUs or product IDs. I then ask the billing manager to say, please give me all of the details of each one of those products. So once that returns, we basically have a list of all the details of the products, and I simply show that in the dialog. So once a user taps on one of those items in the dialog, we can pick up what the item is that they tapped and the SKU associated with that product. We then ask the billing manager to initiate the purchase flow. So this then, the UI and the flow is taken over by Play Services. And then at some point when they've finished that purchase flow, we get a call back of all the purchases and the whether there were errors or not. And then we can run through those purchases and consume them. I know there'll be some questions around what does it mean to consume a product. So we'll get to that in a minute. But at this point, after verifying, validating the purchase, we can thank our customer and do whatever we would like to do with them. Okay, so let's stop there for a second and get back to the discussion. So consuming in-app purchases, that's definitely something that can be a little bit confusing. So the idea there is that a user can only purchase a product once until it has been consumed. So an example of that might be, let's say in a game, you can purchase a boost to make your car go faster or something. Then you don't want customers to keep buying these boosts and keep buying them. Maybe they can only buy one boost every race or every hour or something. So then as a developer, you will only consume that product when it's time for them to buy another one, when you want to allow them to buy another of the same product. So that's consuming a product. Nick, did I explain that well?
I thought you gave a pretty good example, Alex. Yep. I think the word consume can be a little bit confusing, but it's, I suppose, comes from actual physical products that you may buy once, use, and then buy again. Games are often the most common examples here, but I think the examples you gave of the My City app had a few there which made sense too. So yeah, good job.
All right, yes. So the examples where it was sponsoring a lunch or a beer, in this case, I've consumed those products immediately, allowing the customer to effectively sponsor another meal or drink straight away. But there are some other items in that product list, such as sponsoring a timetable or app update, which takes a long time and could be a bit more costly. So I wouldn't want to consume that product immediately, perhaps, because I wouldn't want them to, accidentally repurchase a rather expensive product. Instead, maybe I would wait until there is a timetable update, do that work, and then when releasing the new version with the update, only then consume the product, so that I don't get people sponsoring the same thing multiple times before I've had a chance to do it. So that is roughly how to add in-app billing to your app, how it works, what to watch out for, and hopefully that gives everyone a good idea about that. Now let's talk a little bit about how to actually monetize your apps. What are the good practices here? So I touched on this at the beginning, but there are basically three ways to generate revenue. The first one being paid app. So that's someone gives you money, they pay to download and install the app. It's pretty old school. That's before there were in-app purchases. Now I think a much better approach is to provide a free app where within the app you can unlock premium features or pay to remove adverts or something like that. Dario, have you come across any apps that you've actually been willing to do an in-app purchase in to unlock that premium feature?
Yeah, so I kind of have a really good example, and it kind of touches on the point that you mentioned in the beginning, that if you want to enable in-app purchases in your app, it should be something really valuable for the users. So I decided to start a new journey of learning piano, and I did not know where to start doing that. So this is not kind of like a advert to the app, but I'm using the Simply Piano app, and they have the first free lesson, the first 10 lessons for free, which are like the basics. And once you want to, it's kind of like to show you what the app can do and how you can learn in that, how much you can learn in that small period. And then they will charge you like a subscription fee for you to access every other lesson. So like, I guess that's a pretty good example of something that I've used, and I feel it provided me with the right value, so I didn't mind paying for it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that is a good example. So maybe if we move on to the other types, the in-app purchase and subscription, I could see that kind of approach working, both of those approaches working for that app, where maybe you just want to buy one lesson to get started with, but once you're actually Beethovening it, you might want to pay a subscription so that every month you get the latest lessons, if that's how piano works at least.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Into that, like now that you mentioned that example, there's actually quite something real clear that they do around those lines, is that so you have sheet notes, which is where the notes of a music are written. So most of those are actually, you can have some of those for sale, and and you can use the in-app purchases to buy those apart from the lesson. So you can have a subscription for the lessons, and then you can start buying things such as the sheet notes so that you can play that favorite song of yours.
Excellent. Yeah. How many sheet notes have you purchased? Are you still on the digital side?
So far, I'm just taking the lessons and using the free sheet note that they have. Once I get there, maybe.
Excellent. Cool. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic example. Rebecca, you seem like you might have something to add to that. Maybe another example of an app or some sheets that you bought.
Yeah, I think the one app that I've recently purchased I think it's called Action Bar Launcher. I know they've got like some cool, so it's basically a default launcher for your phone, and then you can purchase certain things within the app just to like make it look a little bit nicer or customize something more or unlock a little bit of the features inside. So the app was really nice up front, like you could use it without too much trouble. And then I wanted to do something more. And then that's obviously where I was like, okay, I need to pay for this feature. But the value of that for me was quite high, so I didn't mind paying for that.
All right, excellent. I have a couple more slides here that we can maybe just run through about the different ways that you can monetize. So as we already covered, the paid apps, the old school way of doing things, rather opt for the in-app purchases route where you can offer to unlock premium features or just remove ads. But then if we have a closer look at good examples of in-app products, we have a few different varieties here. So obviously there's the in-game currencies, diamonds, jewels, or just about anything that's shiny should do. Personally, I'm not really a fan of this mechanism. I think the sort of impact it has on people's not that brilliant, but it does work very well. Buying a bag of jewels, you just put a little bit of money in at a time and then you can progress in the game. So in-app currencies is a very good way of selling a product that you can then use discreetly within your app. Another approach, as sort of both Daria and Rebecca mentioned, is unlocking features or content. So that could be new weapons in a game or new filters in a camera app or even sheet notes. The other option is to sell a digital currency, digital asset. So an example of this might be a designer or an artist where they might have a showcase app that shows off their icon packs and art, and they can actually sell that to customers who can buy those icon packs directly in the app. If we move on to subscriptions, I think Nick might have a good idea of what some good examples are here.
Yeah, so your slides are pretty good examples. However, I did think about it, and I thought about a way of defining sort of what would make a good subscription, at least one example, because I can imagine there being a time when a developer thinks, should I make this a subscription or should I make this a once-off purchase? And in my mind, a subscription for me is often access to content. So you don't necessarily own the music that you listen to on Google Play Music, but you get access to listen to it for the period that you pay the subscription. The same might be said for accessing sort of stock photography that you could then use in a project. But at the end of the day, it might not actually belong to you. You use it and you consume it for that period of time. But I think here your examples here of continuing value on a month-to-month or whatever period you choose basis makes sense.
All right, excellent. So then just to wrap up this idea of how to monetize your app, I think the focus should be on quality. And that means a quality app as well as a quality product or service. If people like how your app works and they like what they get from it, like Dario and Rebecca do, then they are willing to pay for it. And that's the key here, is to produce something that people are willing to pay for. So with the focus on quality, that's definitely a good way to get there. So maybe just before we wrap up with questions, a couple more comments on how to monetize well. So if we have our focus on quality, both in the app and the product and service, I think we should actually just dive right into questions. So are there any questions that have come through on the live chat? All right, I see one here. What is the process taken by Google to activate new countries? Interesting. And what can developers in countries that are not activated yet do to raise awareness? These are very good questions and ones that I've pondered many nights alone. But so one thing is that you can raise awareness about it by talking to developer advocates in your area or GDEs or at your GDG meetups. If you keep requesting it, I think that's probably the only way that Google's going to realize that there is significant demand for it. The other thing that I think is really important is it's up to the developers in the countries where it is activated to actually show that we can use it effectively. So one thing that I would really like to hear is from more developers who have used in-app purchases from Nigeria, Tanzania, Egypt, and South Africa, so that we can showcase those apps, so that we can promote them and show that, look, our developers can do great things here when given the opportunity. So if we can get hold of a few examples like that, that should help raise sort of the expectation that if it's provided to us, we will create great things. Don't know if anyone would like to add anything more to that question.
I think also just adding on to the, like, what is the process taken to activate new countries? I think it's more of a legal issue than a technical side issue. So a lot of the things it's dealing with local tax laws and figuring out like the process of paying out a developer in that country. So it's not a case of necessarily the technical capabilities, because I think from the Play Store point of view, it's more just probably enabling, like ticking a box or enabling something for a certain country, but it's more the process of Google going into this country and dealing with all the financial regulations that they need to adhere to. So I think it's more of that, and they have to sort of analyze and see, is this country going to be valuable for us to sort of do this big effort of like trying to make sure we stick to all the regulations and all that. So it's not necessarily a technical problem, but more the legal side.
Absolutely, that's a good thing to point out, Rebecca. And worth noting that in Tanzania, Nigeria, and Egypt, it's only possible to withdraw the money generated as dollars or euros. South Africa is the only country in Africa where you can have that payment paid out to your local bank account in your local currency. So there definitely are challenges around this. It's not like Google just doesn't want to do it. But if we can showcase that there is a business case that we will help generate them revenue, that's only going to help. All right, shall we move on to some more questions? Let's see, what do we have? Here's one. Does the dev have control over the UX, UI of the payment flow, or does Play Services control that? So that is a good question. And as I showed in the example, it's a bit of a combination of both. So you can choose how to present your products, and you can do that in any way you want. But once it gets time to initiate the payment flow, that's where Play Services takes over. And it presents a familiar UI and UX to the user, which I think is absolutely the right thing to do. We don't want to be asking them for credit card details or hiding the price or anything like that. We want to show a familiar experience at this point. We want them to be comfortable handing over their money, basically. How do refunds work? That is a good question. So it's a slightly gray area. If you Google, how do I get a refund? There's a good answer in the Google Help area, which points to a number of other articles, which point to some other articles, which eventually lead to a 404. I'll be sure to report that. But there is some good information there, definitely. And the short answer is it depends, but very often you can, in fact, get a refund. So the developer does certainly have the ability to issue a refund for, in my experience, it's been any in-app purchase so far. And you can also, through your account history in Google, where you see your purchases, you can lay a dispute there. And the reasons can be the product didn't live up to the promises, you didn't receive the goods, or that you bought it accidentally. And then depending on that, Google might deal with it, depending on the time span as well. But they might also hand it over to the developer to decide what the developer wants to do with it. That's how it works for in-app purchases. Nick, I don't know if you know anything different about subscriptions.
Yeah, so my understanding is that with subscriptions, because it's automatic billing, once your payment goes through for a particular month or billing period, let's say it's a month, there's no real going back on that. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain that's the case. And you can, however, cancel your subscription whenever you want. So, and also your subscription may automatically cancel if your payment methods fail. So, yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, cool. One last question I see through here is the merchant account tied to the Play Store account, or can you create one depending on where you want to distribute your app? So as far as I understand, it is tied directly to your Play Store account. So theoretically, you could register a whole new Play Store account, and it is tied to the region where you will sort of receive that revenue. And that absolutely should be linked to where you're living. So although you create the Play Store merchant account in a specific region, you can still charge people all over the world. So it doesn't limit your customer base, which is fantastic, because many apps have obviously been generating revenue from African consumers, and now we finally have an opportunity to sort of get in on that pie and help keep that revenue within Africa. So one related point there is that how people spend money on the Play Store varies by country. So credit cards is a very common one almost all over the world, but also in South Africa, for example, you can use your airtime to purchase things on the Play Store. You can also use M-Pesa in Kenya, and there are a variety of different local options in different countries. See, one question that's come in from chat as well. Why can't we edit the prices on subscription after activating them? Nick, I think this is one for you.
Yes, that is one for me. Sorry about that. If I'm 100% honest, I don't know why that is the case.
I have a theory.
I can tell you the rules that I know of. So basically, if you do want to change the price, the only option you have is to publish a new subscription with a new ID. So that's kind of, you have to then show that your user again instead of the original subscription that you showed them. And then basically users who will have purchased that original product will then continue to be charged at the original price. So you can kind of migrate users from one subscription to another without too much friction and loss of customer money. But why that is, I'm really not sure. So I'll let you dive in on that, Alex.
Okay, great. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. If you change the monthly subscription amount without informing customers, that would be a little bit unfortunate for them, I think. Imagine the surprise when you check your bill and you've actually been paying $100 a month instead of 10. So from that perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense that you basically need consent from your users when changing a subscription.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So I think that wraps up all of the questions. So let's wrap up the show. So recap, in-app billing. It's easy to get going. And thank you to Google for enabling it in more African countries. Let's keep the pressure on and hopefully we'll get that spread even wider. So the best way to do this is for devs in these countries to showcase what they've done. So we are looking for these success stories. Please do share them with us on Twitter, on Google Plus even, wherever it makes sense. And then just to touch on what's coming up in Experts on Air, next month we have Mike, who will be doing his first Expert on Air the 19th of April. The topic is the state of progressive web apps. I thought those were done, I guess not. And then after that in May, of course, there is Google I/O, and hopefully we'll all be going there. And we'll give a good recap and feedback on Google I/O after that in May. So for announcements and any changes to any of this, find us on Twitter with the hashtag #GoogleAfricaDevs. And with that all wrapped up, unless there's anything from anybody else, I'd just like to say thank you all. Dale, Anidi, Dario, Nick, Rebecca, Vivian, Alex. Yeah, that's me. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.